It's 5:58. I am so excited. I want to say a special welcome to Lakeisha, who comes from tutelage under our chair, Jackie Grimshaw. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Welcome to all of you who are new to Chicago Women Take Action. Hope you will join us and continue to be a part as we go forward in this year with so much going on. So much going on. Ms. Kasi, would you like to say anything before we get started with our speakers?
No, just welcome. And we all have a lot of work to do. And I look forward to working with everyone. We'll stay together to do it. I look forward to the presentations and discussions today. And thanks to our speakers. So that's all.
Okay. Hey, Caroline, it's good to see you. Caroline Gimbleton's on. So we're gonna start with Reverend Lozano, Reverend Emma Lozano, and I am supposed to give her an introduction, but she has done so much, and I've known her so long, and I really just want to hear everything that she has to say. I will let you know that she is Pastor Emma Lozano from United Lincoln Methodist Church here in Chicago. She has been in leadership with LULAC for how probably as long as LULAC has been in existence. She is a well-known activist throughout Chicago and this country. And without going any farther, I just want to say welcome, Pastor Lozano. Take it away and let us know what's going on with immigration from your perspective.
Thank you very much, Betty, and I'm very honored to be here with so many women in action, really, to defend our communities. I'm Pastora Emma Lozano from the Lincoln United Methodist Church and associate pastor to Adalberto United Methodist Church. You know, Lincoln and both Adalberto United Methodist Church under our Familia Latina Unida and Legal Education and Defense Ministries is recognized for providing training, workshops, and accompanying our members and greater community with immigration-related issues. We are most recognized for having provided sanctuary for our member of Adalberto Church, Elvira Arellano, in 2006. That triggered the new sanctuary movement. If you remember, before Elvira, sanctuary was offered like in a clandestine manner, where people were invited into the church and they were basically secretly there while, you know, they were trying to defy whether it was the government or deportations, etc., or reasons why they had to seek sanctuary from the church. But we made it extremely clear and public that she was in our church. And she said, if they want to come into my church and separate me from my U.S. citizen son, when I'm an essential worker of this country and contributing taxes, then they can do that and the whole world would be watching. And we got a lot of support all over the country from her basically taking such a stand. And we continue to be public and challenge the broken immigration laws. And we understand as pastors that when we provide sanctuary, we are taking a personal risk with possible legal consequences. But we hadn't had to take any consequences because there was like restrictions for these sensitive locations. So, but we're firm believers as followers of Jesus Christ. We believe our decisions, we're following the teachings of Jesus Christ, and we have had members of our congregation that are existing with deportation orders, and we have provided them sanctuary. Francisca Lino lived in our church for 3 years. And when the Biden won the election for presidency in the last administration, he was not looking for these essential workers as a focus. So therefore, she was able to leave the church. Since then, we have legal attorneys that are helping her with her case, but she's even fearful that when she goes to her check-in in February this month, later this month, that she may be detained and deported. She has 5 U.S. citizen children. She has 5 U.S. citizen grandchildren. She has a U.S. citizen spouse, but because she's already in deportation proceedings from an issue that leads way back. I don't even know how long, because it was her babies were her twins were babies, and now they're in their 20s, leading all the way back that time, where because when she was filling out, or she was being sponsored by her husband, they had asked her certain questions, and the notary who was filling out the forms for her answered that she had never attempted to cross the border, and she had. And when she went for her permanent residency interview, she was told that she was a liar, and she was detained for 21 days. These are the types of members of our church. They're mixed status families. They're members that of our church have maybe an undocumented spouse. They may have U.S. citizen children, many of them do, or DACA recipient children, which we call dreamers, that are adults now. Many of them are attorneys and nurses, and and now they are also in jeopardy. So these are the types of members of our church. And we at our church feel that we are targeted because we have been targeted in the past, and we're afraid ICE would come to our church because we've been so vocal about these broken laws, and because they know members of our church have been also public and basically saying that these broken immigration laws don't serve us and they should be changed. So we have been visited in the last, it was last week on Thursday or Tuesday it was, that MAGA Proud Boys came to my house and to my church, filming me and asking me how many illegals, aliens that I had hiding in my church. I did not respond to them because a few years ago I did respond, and that went viral on their white supremacist sites. So I did not respond to them, but unfortunately my son-in-law did, and I'm not sure if this has already been posted up on their site, because I don't follow them. I just don't need to know what they're saying, because I have to do what I have to do. So we have been targeted also by white supremacists before that have broken the door of our church. One of them is still doing time, or hopefully he's still doing time, which is Mr. Wright, who came and broke the door of our church because we wouldn't let him in. But he did come in a week before, and he had come to a Bible study where I was doing in Spanish to children, and was demanding that I speak English because we're in America. So later he was caught breaking into a Jewish temple downtown, and he was arrested and doing time. Another person was painting swastikas on my door of my church. And then that's when we decided to put cameras up, and he was caught and he's doing time. I don't know if these people have been released since these issues have occurred, but we also have had like the recent MAGA folks that are Proud Boys, they call themselves, coming to our church just last week. So we know that these issues, and because of our stance, and because of our congregation, that we are targets. And I'm more fearful that, that ICE might come too. But since the 20th, we've gone virtual for our Spanish and mixed status family service. So we are no longer having the Spanish service in person. So we are now having that done virtually. Like during the pandemic, we learned a lot, my sisters. We learned a lot, that we can be together and spiritually and be in worship together and still be apart and safe. So we learned a lot by then, but then we were waiting for the vacuna, the medicine, the vaccine. For this particular disease that's going on in this country, there isn't a vaccine. If there is, it's really our unity and how we're going to stand together and really fight back, because this administration has rescinded those restrictions to go into churches and to go into hospitals and to go into schools. And there was a reason why those restrictions existed, because that's places where innocent people go to either get help because they're sick, or because our children need to be in a safe learning environment, or because we're in worship together, and they should be sanctuaries and they should be safe places. So that is my report. We will continue to stand firm. Our English congregation, our worship is still continues and very well attended. And we are going through Know Your Rights training, and we're on rapid response teams, and we're continuing to follow the teachings of Jesus Christ, and the commandment that says, love your neighbor as you love yourself. And we're strong and safe, I believe, because we've been donated some more cameras that as you pass, they light up. And I just feel that we're doing the right thing at the right time. And I really feel that, you know, that it's people like us that are willing to stand when it's very difficult, not only when it's popular or it's easy, but when it's definitely times like these, dark times, where we stand firm for what is right and just. So that is my report, and I thank you, my sisters, for listening.
Reverend Lozano, is there anything that we can do on this call to help and to assist you in your efforts?
Well, I think it would be awesome to have like, you know, like everybody's contact information. So if we do come under attack, that we can come together. I think that there is no stronger message when it comes from mothers, grandmothers, you know, Christian leadership, people like ourselves, to really stand up and say what is going on is really unjust and wrong and immoral. And also if we do find ourselves under attack, that people are willing to come and stand with us. But right now, our congregation is safe. We went virtual right after the 20th. We didn't wait, and we're already building that. Sometimes we have some technical difficulties because, you know, at my age, I get a little forgetful, and I'm not really a techie, and I need a lot of help from the Gen Z and from the millennials, and they're there for me. They're in the English congregation, so so we're working it out. But like, we learned a lot during the pandemic, and we're standing strong.
Does anyone have any questions of Pastor Lozano? You can raise your hand or. Oh, someone is asking if there is an emergency line that can be texted so that they can be notified to show up.
I don't have an emergency line. You know, I'm using my cell phone and our second line for the church, but certainly, you know, that's how we've been operating. We have security now, 24-hour, young people, Black and brown young men that are helping us right now. And they're really monitoring both the church and the house. One other thing that I didn't mention, also on the same day that I was visited by MAGA, and I think these two issues, and I'm saying it clearly, are not related, but also we got on videotape, and this person is now in a hospital. He tried to set fire to my house. So
Wow.
whether those two things are related or not, but we have him on video dousing all the entrances and exits to the parsonage where I live with my grandchildren and my children. And we had that on tape. I've turned it over to the authorities, but we did not know that he was doing that until later. And I just thought it was somebody with mental health issues. And I had my daughter and my son-in-law take him to the hospital. And then later on, when we looked at the security video, he was trying to set fire to my house. But I interrupted him It was at 5:15 in the morning. I opened the door because my dog was barking and I saw a young man out there and I invited him into the house. Probably not a good decision to make, and we're all re-evaluating that. But he had his camera up, and later on I thought maybe I interrupted him before he lit the match. And so those that this is what we're going through right now, and I'm probably not the only person that's being targeted, but I certainly feel that our church is a target. So therefore, we're going to continue to be vigilant. And like I said, we calling on our community. All of our community understands that they have to keep our church on watch, and it's been humbling, but it's also been a time for all of us to realize how a community can work together and how we all love each other.
Thank you. Jackie Algie has a question.
No, I don't have a question. I
Oh,
just wanted to say hello to my sister, Sister Emma.
Hey, Jackie, sister, how you doing?
Okay, darling. How are
Good
you?
to hear your voice.
It's good to hear yours. You know, we got to catch up, so I'll call you in the morning.
Also, yeah, for reals.
Okay. Love you. And I'm
Love you
glad you're
back.
safe.
You know,
Okay.
we're
yeah.
good.
There's a
Okay.
comment in the chat from Tracy Hughes. She says, thank you for sharing and wants to know if you have legal support and guidance in the event ICE returns. And also her church, which is, you're very familiar with St. Sabina, Father Flager, is facing the same kind of scrutiny, although they haven't had any immediate visits yet.
We have two wonderful attorneys that are also members of our organization, which is John Antia and Chris Bergen, who have been counseling us. They're coming to meet with our cadre of volunteers and to also train them on and also with these new executive orders that came down. So we're looking forward to that. But we've been very well schooled on Know Your Rights, et cetera, and we've been disseminating that information to our members and to our community so they know how to deal with ICE if they come to their doors. So we're just going to be training new cadre and volunteers of our organizations and our members of our church coming soon.
Okay, Jane Ramsey.
Yeah, I just, Emma, just want to also honor all the work that you've done and your late husband, Slim Coleman, and your family who you're raising up with the same set of values and leadership. So that's extraordinary. But also at this time, and I think we also want to underscore that we have folks we want to reach out to be able to respond to your call. So if we can make sure that we make those connections happen. What kinds of um, information are you seeing in the community in terms of other activity, other ICE activity? What's the set of, I know organizations are responding, but can you talk a little bit about the community and ICE threats and actions, and also if the city's giving you protection that you need? So
I would just like to say that there's been there's three members of our church. They're elderly women that are U.S. citizens that do come to stand with me as I do the virtual service on Sunday. All three of them on Saturday were witness of ICE on the streets in La Villita or back of the yards where they were arresting someone that was just walking down the street. One was a very distraught woman in about her 50s. And all three of these women who have witnessed this feel like they are so, like they don't feel like that there's anything that they can do to stop what's going on, and it's a very hard position to be in when you see the eyes of the victims that are being taken. These are essential workers. These are people just walking down the street. They're stopping Mexicanos that are U.S. citizens. There was the other abuelita from our church, her grandson was stopped with his girlfriend, and they just jumped out on him on Grand Avenue and asked him for their IDs. They gave up their IDs, and then they were told they went on the computer, but these were ICE agents. On Saturday, you got 3 events from 3 different women and 3 different sites from my church that saw this happening. So it's happening. But I still believe because Chicago was so organized that they haven't been able to meet the numbers that they thought they were going to meet or have the show that they public show that he expected here, because we got our rights. We know our rights. We had organizations stand up. Information got out. People did what I did, like we went virtual, and people are protecting themselves. But at the same time, there are casualties. And they are people that are getting arrested. They're not, remember that who the criminals they claim are. People already in deportation proceedings like Elvira Arellano or Francisca Lino that filled out a form, is more like a typo than really being a criminal. We're not talking about rapists or anything. We're talking about essential workers that cross the border without inspection. And they already have U.S. citizen kids, and we've been promised for decades that we were going to have immigration reform, and we don't have it. So yes, those things are happening in our community, and we have rapid response teams that are coming out. But what more can we do but videotape them? We have to challenge them in courts. But remember how things are lined up. This is going to be a tough 4 years, and it's going to be a learning experience for all of us. I don't care if we're lawyers or we're pastors. It's a learning experience because we're under a regime right now that is leaning more towards fascism every day. And those of us that are people of color, that if we think that they're just right now, the Venezolanos were told that TPS is gone. Now they're going to be undocumented again. So, there was an argument between that too, because Mexicanos that have been here for decades were never offered parole or workers permits. And then Venezolanos that just came in because of the sanctions Trump put on Venezuela, and they were forced to leave their country because they were hungry, and they came to this country. There was even division there, because what are you going to do with all these people? And they started putting them in the park districts and everything else. Now all those people are subject to the same deportations. So you have people panicking everywhere, and you have divisions that were created, I think, by design by these Confederate governors that sent people over here, and we had to deal with those situations. I'm proud of my mayor and his position that he took. And I'm actually proud of the governor that they're standing up saying that we will resist and the Chicago police will not cooperate. I'm good with all of that, but that's not stopping those people that are falling victims to this massive deportations. But Chicago is more organized, and they were not able to do the massive deportations that they expected to do, but I don't think they're done.
Terry, thank you. Terry Corner.
Hi, I know the kids are protected in schools, but how are they protected going to and from school?
Parents who have to drop their kids off that are undocumented, for example, ICE could be waiting in the parking lots, they could be waiting around the schools, and they could start. That was another, in Elgin, there was workers that came out of a factory that ICE was in the parking lot and asking for IDs, and they picked up 3 brothers. From there, they were all brothers, and they were all, now they're in deportation proceedings. So the same thing perhaps could happen to parents as they drop off their children. So here in our community, we're doing, helping parents to drop off and pick up their children. That is a volunteer rapid response teams that are being created. But, they're not sustainable. We need to really stop this because they're just not sustainable. But people will come together, but how long can we sustain these? People have to go to work. They have to make money. They have to put food on their tables. And right now, some people have not left their homes. And people are delivering their food. We have youth that are delivering food to people's homes because they don't feel safe to leave their homes or to go to work or to send their children to school.
Are they letting kids go to school virtually, like back during the pandemic?
I don't have, I mean, that would have to be a question for, the Chicago Public Schools, and I don't have those answers. I'm a Chicago School Board member, and I cannot speak for the Chicago School Board on, you know, uh, platforms like this.
My
Thank you.
neighbor and I went to eat in Little Village last week because I saw on the news one of the restaurant owners saying people weren't coming into the restaurants to eat because they were afraid to come out. And the direction that we went to get there, we went through Pilsen and then into Little Village, and there were no cars on the street. It was almost like COVID. And the restaurant that we went to, we've been there several times before on a Sunday, and it was just loaded with families and their children. And when we went into the restaurant, we were the only two people in there. So one of the ways that we can, the restaurant owner was saying, one of the things that we can do as a people, if nothing else, is support those restaurants in those neighborhoods so that they can stay open until whatever this is that's going on goes down. Pastor Lozano, I want to thank you so much, and hopefully you will stay on as we continue. And I'm going to ask our president, our chair, Jackie Grimshaw, if she would introduce Attorney Gzesh so that she can give us a presentation as well. And thank you so very much for joining us tonight. And hopefully you can stay on with us as we
Thank you
receive.
very much. Thank you very much. And I'd like to stay on and listen to the rest of the meeting, but I'd also like to let people know you are all invited. We don't have the exact date, but it's next week. Former Congressman Gutierrez is calling leadership to all meet in one restaurant in La Villita, in Little Village, to support the businesses and also to hold a presser to say that we are going to continue to support the community, and we are inviting leadership to be part of that. I can let Betty know, and the information
Yeah.
can get out to all. Thank you so much. God bless you,
Thank
my
you.
sisters. Mis hermanas, las quiero mucho. Que Dios las bendiga.
Sister
Thank
Jackie.
you, Betty, very much. And I was having difficulty with both video and audio. I've been away from doing this for a while, and my fingers forgot how to work. but but I am back. Thank you, Emma, for your participation, and it's very interesting to get kind of like the on the ground description of what's going on. Because if you're not in those communities, you don't see that same kind of activity. But Emma was referencing legal advice, legal information, and so I want to introduce um, Susan Gzesh, who is my friend, who is my neighbor, who is my book club partner, but most of all, she is an attorney, a professor at the University of Chicago. But she has been dealing with immigration issues almost since I've known her, and that's going back to Mayor Harold Washington days. So with that, Susan, please take it away and bring us up to date and give us more information on what's happening from a legal point of view and what we might be able to do.
Sure, I'd be happy to. Thank you, Jackie. Thank you to CWTA. I want to honor the late, great Marilyn Katz, who was my dear friend and a friend of many of you, and one of the main reasons that this organization exists. I have a question first. What time is this event supposed to be over? If we have a hard stop at 7, then I will make sure not to talk too long so people can ask questions. What's the time frame?
Our stopping time, I dropped dead at 7:30, but
Okay.
we try and that's flexible from 7 to 7:30. It depends on how interested people are and the questions they have.
All right, great, thanks. So I want to answer a couple of very basic background questions. Some of you know the answers to these questions very well, and others of you don't at all. I also want to ask that as many people as possible put their faces on the screen. I know you might be tired. It's a long day. I don't care if you don't have makeup on or did your hair. But after 2 years or whatever it was of teaching online, I got sick of looking at people's names and not their faces. So hello to all of you. The background questions are, how is it that we have so many undocumented people in the United States? And particularly, how come there's so many undocumented Mexicans in the US? Another question is, how do we respond to this myth that people who are here undocumented are here because they just didn't want to get in line? So I'm going to start with that one because it leads into the other one, which is that there isn't any line. The way most of the people who are in the United States undocumented are here because it was the only way they could come. There's an international statistic that 99% of refugees are not admitted legally to their destination countries. They just arrive and then they try to get refugee status recognized. In the United States, the way our immigration laws have been shaped, particularly over the last century and a half, have illustrated the really ambivalent relationship. And I'm going to get into the Mexico case because it's the biggest and in some ways the most significant. They're really an illustration of the US's ambivalent and racist attitude towards Mexican workers. Mexicans have been welcomed when their labor was needed in the economy at certain periods, but they were welcomed because they were considered to have a circular migration and be coming here only temporarily. And at other periods in history, it was time to throw the Mexicans out. This basically starts back in the late 19th century when the US had kicked out and was in the process of kicking out the Chinese workers who we had brought in to build the railroads, to start mining in the West, to work in the gold rush. And after that particular racist effort, which involved uniting both legislators on the West Coast who were anti-Chinese with legislators on the East Coast who were afraid of the German radicals and others who did the Haymarket Rebellion in Chicago, for example, there was a decision made to first restrict any new immigration and then bar Chinese who were legally present in the US from coming back and really try to make life miserable for the Chinese community. The Chinese community on the West Coast resisted. They litigated cases all the way up to the Supreme Court. When there was a registry requirement, which I'm going to talk about again because we're going to see a new one in these executive orders, or there is one already. When there was a registry requirement that all Chinese legally present in the country had to prove the legality of their residence by registering and by the testimony of a white witness. The 6 companies in the San Francisco area that were the large Chinese organizations organized a resistance, and less than 10% of the people registered. So there's always been a history of repression, which meets resistance. Sometimes the resistance is successful. One case the Chinese won in the Supreme Court, which you should keep in mind because it's coming up again, is a case called Wong King Ark, that after the 14th Amendment had been passed by the Reconstruction Congress to declare birthright citizenship of any child born in the United States, except the children of diplomats, and at that time, the children who were members of indigenous tribes. But that law was held to be such a strong constitutional principle that in the 1880s, the Supreme Court, at the same time as they were throwing out Chinese immigrants, barring Chinese who came here as immigrants from naturalizing based on race, they still upheld the right to birthright citizenship for the children of who they called, I guess, the scorned Chinese. Even the child of Chinese immigrants who themselves were never going to be allowed to be US citizens, that child was a birthright citizen of the United States under the 14th Amendment. Now, there's a well-known judge in the US, and just since this is a political group, I'm going to give you a piece of political gossip. There's a judge on the Fifth Circuit whose name is James Ho. He is Chinese American. In 2006, 2007, he wrote a fabulous article upholding birthright citizenship. He really believed in it. He wrote a great piece. What progressive lawyers all over the country knew about it. And now that he aims to be President Trump's first Asian American appointment to the Supreme Court, he's changed his position on birthright citizenship. Now, I want to confess to all of you that in the 90s, I taught James Ho immigration law at the University of Chicago Law School when I was an adjunct there. So I'm not to blame for what he did, but for what he's doing. But it's a really insidious kind of turncoat position for someone who's a strong advocate, despite the fact he was always a Republican. A strong advocate for birthright citizenship is now opposed to it. Okay, so what's the other piece of background? So we kick out the Chinese in the 1880s, 1890s, but we've built the Transcontinental Railroad. We've invented irrigation technology, which opens up formerly arid land in California to farming. Who's going to do all that work if we've thrown out the Chinese? At the same time, there was tremendous social disruption in Mexico during the dictatorship of Porfirio Diaz, who was changing landholding laws and dispossessing campesinos from their land. So there was both the push factor of terrible social conditions in Mexico, which were bad enough that they precipitated the Mexican Revolution in 1910, and a pull factor here in the US of wanting to, we had a huge need for workers. So US recruiters went down to Mexico to bring Mexicans in. That's the start of a very long history of Mexico-US migration. Through the next century, Mexicans were encouraged to come into the United States. During World War I, an otherwise restrictionist Congress had imposed a literacy test on anybody coming into the United States. But the agriculture industry in California raised holy hell that they wouldn't have access to Mexican workers if the literacy test was imposed on the border. So the southern border was exempted from the literacy test. In the 1920s and 1924, 100 years ago, Congress passed a terrible law, anti-Semitic, anti-Catholic, to bar further immigration from Eastern Europe and Southern Europe. Mexicans were still tolerated to come in. They were seen as sort of, quote, birds of passage. They would come work, they would go home. But they did in the 1920s, as we know in Chicago, because the Guadalupe Church here dates to 1926, start settling out permanently in cities and towns where they could find permanent jobs, steel, auto, food processing, etc. But then in the 1920s, Mexicans became a handy scapegoat for the economic problems the country was having, and immigration rates in the city of Chicago cut the Mexican population of Chicago in half. I think the figures where it went down from 50,000 to 25,000, and we don't really know how many of the people who were sent out of the country with their parents were in fact US citizens. But then 1941, the US is in World War II. Oops, we need more workers to staff the factories and fields that American men are getting drafted into the army. And we turn to Mexico, and for the one and only time in US-Mexico history, the arrangement for guest workers, who were called braceros at the time, was by treaty. Mexico, for example, managed to obtain in the treaty a guarantee that none of the bracero workers at that time would be sent to Texas, because Texas was so racist. Bracero workers were welcomed into the US after the war was over. We kept bringing bracero workers in, not under a bilateral treaty with Mexico. By this point, it was unilateral. And it was really until 1965 that we were encouraging Mexican workers to come to the US under the bracero program. The conditions they were working in were very bad. And there was a huge outcry about the terrible conditions. So in 1965, the Congress finally reformed the immigration laws to allow immigration from Asia, from Southern and Eastern Europe that they had barred for so many decades, to allow Chinese to become naturalized US citizens. There had been a racial bar on naturalization by anyone who wasn't either Black or white until 1965. So 1965 was good for prospective immigrants and prospective citizens from many parts of the world. It wasn't quite as good for Mexico, and in 1976 it got worse. Why? Because in the previous decades, if Mexicans wanted to settle permanently in the United States, they had to prove that they were able to support themselves, that they didn't have criminal records, but there wasn't a very strict numbers cap. Starting in 1965, we allowed 100,000 immigrants a year to come in from all of Latin America. And then in 1976, in one stroke, the US Congress turned what had been an encouraged legal Mexican migration. They were taking about 80,000 a year of those slots for Latin America went to people from Mexico. They decided to cut it to 20,000 maximum per country per year. So in one stroke in 1976, Mexican immigration goes overnight from being largely legal to being largely illegal. And we kept encouraging people to come. By 1986, even the Reagan administration realized that we had a valuable and important workforce in the United States that needed stable status. And we had the 1986 law, the Immigration Reform and Control Act. I think some of you probably worked on that. You remember it. The bad news was it imposed employer sanctions on the US that said you couldn't work legally here unless you had permission to work. I'll take questions about that later. But it also legalized something like 2.7 million undocumented workers to become lawful permanent residents, including in Chicago, I think the figure was 300,000 or 400,000 Mexicans and a very large number of Polish immigrants. So that's all the history I'm going to give you. It gives us a legal system where there is no line to get into, where people think, oh, they're just here because they didn't want to wait in line. That's absolutely not true. So I'm going to fast forward now to what's going on. We know that since 1986, there has been no legal remedy for unauthorized workers whose work is incredibly necessary to our economy. People have been living in the shadows. They've been able to carve out a life for themselves. And many, many of them, as Emma was telling you, live in what we call mixed families. A friend of mine who teaches at a prep school that focuses on Latino students, it's a Catholic school, told me that they estimate that over 70% of the kids in their school are from mixed families, which usually means that the children are US citizens and the parents are either undocumented or maybe one of them's a permanent resident, but to get a visa for their spouse takes years, or one of them's a citizen of the parents, but the other parent was deported once, so now they can't get permanent residence, even though they're married to a citizen. It's a very complicated set of laws that the result, if not the actual intent, sometimes I think it is the actual intent, is to keep people in a state of uncertainty and insecurity. So what's going on now? We had Donald Trump come in on an anti-immigrant platform. He wants to do as much as possible, as quickly as possible, to obtain big numbers of people who are being thrown out of the United States. He's done a number of things. He has canceled temporary protected status for 500,000 Venezuelans who came in, I think it's in before 2023. There's another group of 350,000 Venezuelans. This is a national figure. This is not Chicago. Whose TPS is going to run out in April. So this means 850,000 Venezuelans are who had been allowed to come into the country, and temporary protected status is given to people where the conditions in their home country are too dangerous or too insecure for them to return. Nothing has changed in Venezuela, and now we're going to have over 800,000 Venezuelans who are suddenly completely vulnerable. Somebody put a question in the chat about Haitians with TPS. I don't know, but I'm not optimistic given what Trump's lies about Haitians eating who were legally in the US being criminals, being illegal with that town in Ohio last year, his incredibly racist remarks about Haitians eating people's pets in that town. I'm not going to try to predict that they're going to continue Haitian TPS, but I don't want to predict a doomsday scenario if I don't know, but doesn't look good. So what else is going on? As Emma said, they're doing a big show about doing raids. They sent Dr. Phil to Chicago last week to ride along with ICE. I think for Donald Trump, looking at his cabinet appointments, things are only real to him unless they're on television. So they needed somebody who was a TV star to come to Chicago to make the raids look real. It turns out they spread a lot of fear in the community. Unfortunately, some of our media were just echoing the hype without getting the numbers. But the numbers in that first week were actually very small. They arrested about 100 people, which is what they might have done in an ordinary week, picking up people who did have criminal records. The other thing that they did, maybe in the last week, they've arrested another 100, but they have spread, as we have said, tremendous fear. I love the idea that Emma's Church is doing accompaniment for people and helping them get their kids to school. I'm sure they're also helping people get kids to doctor's appointments. But she's absolutely right that this kind of important volunteer effort, which I would really urge any of you, particularly in your churches or synagogues, to organize as part of the rapid response teams that are going up, an escort service for people who want it. Somebody asks, I'm going to get to the questions in the chat in a minute, and I already see a whole bunch of them. So let me just end very quickly. It is likely that some of the other groups whose status depends on the president's discretion. In other words, there's no legislation that set up DACA. The legislation that sets up TPS gives the discretion over granting TPS to the president. That's in the law, unfortunately. I've never heard in all of the groups who have had TPS for various periods of time over the years, Salvadorans, Lebanese, Haitians, that TPS was ended just for an arbitrary reason. TPS was usually ended either because there was a legislative solution and people got to remain permanently, or because conditions in their countries improved. It has not happened that TPS was just cut off because the president didn't like, the racist president didn't like that group of people. So what else is going to happen? Trump has promised, this is horrible, to reopen Guantanamo as a place to put we're not sure who. My friend Pedro Gerson, Gerson, who's a law professor at Kent, just wrote a really good piece in Slate yesterday, which I will send to this list, about the plans to open a camp in Guantanamo. Guantanamo does not have 30,000 beds. They're going to spend a lot of money. Some of us have been conscious long enough to remember when interdicted Haitians were being put in Guantanamo in the early 80s, partly when they were being picked up in boats in the middle of the Caribbean, or is that now the Gulf of America? I forget, and brought to Guantanamo, sometimes to be paroled into the United States. We don't want to repeat the Guantanamo experience. What else? Well, let's think about Trump's promise to deport 11 million people. I'm just going to give you a very brief general overview. It's very expensive and inefficient to go around arresting people one at a time, which is what they were doing mostly in the last couple of weeks in Chicago. It will be more efficient if they can add more force by deputizing state and local police to help them. They already, when they came into Chicago, made a big show of having IRS agents, DEA agents, FBI, if there's anybody left in the FBI, along for the raids. But they would really have to have huge force multipliers to get anywhere near arresting 11 million people on the street and just from their houses. It's more efficient for them to go to workplaces because you would find people, this is what they used to do in the 70s. Remember, people are there, they are not with their families, they're all in one place. The routine in the early 80s used to be arrest them at the factory, take them to the Broadview Processing Center, try to get them to O'Hare by the afternoon by getting them to sign something that is cynically called voluntary departure. So getting people individually is not particularly efficient. Getting people at workplaces is somewhat more efficient, and going to prisons and jails where people are already being held and under the influence of this brand new Laken-Riley bill that just was signed into law last week, there can be mandatory detention for foreign nationals accused of even minor crimes while they're waiting to be deported for crimes that previously would not have rendered them deportable. I think I'm going to stop this parade of horribles right now and just mention that there are some organizations in Chicago doing fabulous work. I put in the chat the Family Helpline for Illinois Coalition for Immigrant and Refugee Rights. They're doing wonderful work. Organized Communities Against Deportation is on the ground as a grassroots group training rapid response teams. Illinois Coalition for Immigrant and Refugee Rights has over 100 member organizations. Many of those organizations are conducting their own community trainings to get people to know their rights. And we were complimented by Tom Homan, the immigration czar, by saying Chicago was kind of difficult for them because they found a lot of people who knew their rights. So let's keep up that reputation, keep going with that. And now I'll take some questions. Let me answer the questions that I see in the chat. I'll take a couple of those and then ask you. Jackie LG, hi Jackie, asks, do Ukrainians have TPS and are they subject to any form of deportation? The Ukrainians were mostly admitted to the US with lawful status. It's not TP, and they have employment authorization. And they had a community to welcome them, and they're white. So 30,000 Ukrainians coming to Chicago made practically no ripple at all, whereas a huge fuss was put up over the Venezuelans who came in without being invited. But, you know, the Ukrainians are still struggling in this economy. Isn't it Congress's job to fashion a reasonable immigration law? Yeah, but they haven't done it, Jeanette. I wouldn't hold my breath. Occasionally, we push them into doing things that are reasonable, that are humanitarian, that are not racist. But I hate to say it seems to be the exception rather than the rule. Oh, thanks. Betsy Rubin put the ICER hotline in. Okay. What is shutting down the CBP app, the CBP1 app legal? Do people know what that is? It was where people coming to the border to apply for asylum could apply online for an appointment to come in. Trump abolished it. Yeah, it's legal. I mean, you can't, how can you contest it? People outside the United States do not have a due process right recognizable in the US to a benefit they depended on continuing. And sad to say, the Universal Declaration for Human Rights in 1948 said that all people had the right to seek and obtain asylum in other countries. But that was just a declaration. In 1951, when the United Nations drafted the Refugee Convention, which we and many other countries ultimately signed and became obligated to, the only guarantee was not that you could enter and receive asylum, but that you wouldn't be thrown back to the country you fled from. It's a partial promise, which hasn't even been realized now. Is the point of Trump's strategy to spread fear rather than actually wreck the economy? I don't know. I mean, the tariff stuff seems so stupid. I think he may not even realize he's going to wreck the economy and expel the necessary workers. Everybody is telling him the food chain will collapse if we don't have undocumented workers. And I'm not talking just about going into a restaurant and having it be open adequate hours and adequate service and staff in the kitchen to cook. I mean the food that gets picked from our fields, and 25% tariffs on fruits and vegetables from Mexico. What's that going to do to people's diets and their capacity to sustain themselves? Let me see. What's going to happen to the Dreamers? I don't know. They are really, in some ways, the most popular of the group of people who have temporary status, which is dependent on the whim of the executive branch. There were originally about 800,000 Dreamers, young people who had been brought to this country very young by their parents and had never gotten legal status. Of those, and they were now, because they had some stability, able to go to finish high school, go to college. Many of them had done that already, being undocumented, but now their status was more secure. About 300,000 of those 800,000 have gotten permanent residence. A couple I know got married. They married their college girlfriend or boyfriend, and they settled their status that way. But there's still around 500,000 Dreamers who are in a precarious status. Okay, let me see if there's questions. People raise their hands. I know how to answer that. And if Emma wants to jump in because she knows the answer, then please do so.
I just wanted to add that for people to really understand, like for the Mexican community, that originally, like California, Texas, Nevada, Utah, New Mexico, most of Arizona and, parts of Oklahoma, Kansas, and Wyoming, those were all part of Mexico. For us to be illegal in this country or considered that is really by design because of our population. So I just wanted people to remember that fact.
Yeah, we conquered it from Mexico in the Treaty of in the U.S.-Mexico War, the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo in 1848. And a lot of people in that region say, we didn't cross the border crossed us.
Okay,
questions?
thank you, Susan. Any other questions? Raise your hand or either come off mute.
I see a couple
Susan?
other questions.
Yeah, it's Susan, go ahead.
Hi, so I had a question about the ID checks. I've been seeing like conflicting information. Are people allowed to legally refuse to show their IDs, or what if they're with a group with like FBI?
It's a tricky answer. Every person in the U.S. is fully protected by the Bill of Rights because the Bill of Rights says persons. It doesn't say citizens. That was partly because the framers wanted to avoid mentioning slavery. But every person has the right to remain silent. Now, you have the right to remain silent. If you remain silent, will they arrest you? They might. If they arrest you when you've remained silent and you don't give your name, how's your family going to find you? That's the only sort of practical question that somebody asserted as against asserting your constitutional rights. But there's a certain amount of sense to it. So I think the only time I remember a whole group of immigrants in Chicago absolutely refusing to give their names were Iranian students who were arrested here in the late 1970s. They just shut up. They, as an old friend of mine said in a tape that they did for the demonstrators in the George Floyd era in 2020, what should you do if the police ask you a question? Shut the fuck up. You just have to Google shut the fuck up. You can see the whole tape of very esteemed lawyer advice. It's a risk, really, because you don't want to get lost in the system. It's very interesting, though. The United Nations now has a special official to take complaints from people's families when they cannot find their families in the ICE system. It's the special rapporteur on forced disappearances. It's very interesting. The UN has gotten into it. And the sad case is of the children who were separated from their families during Trump's first term, it was some 3,000 children. I think there's some 1,000 of them who, despite court orders and despite efforts, have never been returned to their families.
Wow. Okay. Any other questions? Go ahead.
Here in Chicago, are they going out into other neighborhoods or non-workplaces and going to people's houses and getting them?
Well, there have been, Emma had a couple of reports she made that were very credible about just a couple of individuals
walking down the street. Yeah.
Walking down the street. There was an arrest that first weekend of a man from his house. I don't remember what neighborhood, Northwest Side, someplace. I think somebody whose name they had already is someone who had been either already ordered deported and failed to leave, or had a criminal record and criminal convictions, and they were arresting him to then hold him for deportation. You can lose your green card if you're convicted of certain crimes. And so they just went and arrested this one man, and then the news stations made a huge story about it because he seemed to be the only person arrested that entire Sunday that Dr. Phil was on the case. And I'm sorry for his family that it happened, but at least it wasn't big numbers.
Yeah, Attorney Gzesh, you mentioned briefly just a second ago what I was going to ask about, which is these children, since the Biden administration is over, these 1,000 or so kids who they have never matched back up with parents or relatives or anything. What happens to them?
Well, I'm not I'm not one of the lawyers on that case, but I know that they have spent an extensive amount of energy trying to match the children up with their families. And some of the families who were deported back, God forbid, some of the parents died. But what happens to them is they go into the child welfare system here. I'm sure, I would hope that the children are with stable and kind foster families at least. But that, I think, is all that can be expected for them. It's awful. I mean, there has been all during the Biden administration, there were efforts going on, and I could probably find an article where somebody recounts the details of all the efforts that were made and how it happened. If you're interested, I'll look for something and send it for you, Betty, and then you can share it with the group. No, it's a sad, sad, unfinished chapter of immigration enforcement in the U.S.
I could see those kids growing up and going to not ISIS, but whatever this.
Well, being incredibly alienated and
Yeah,
hating you.
yeah,
Whatever.
from this, just hating this country for what happened to them.
Yeah.
You
Carol
know,
Levine, you want to take her hand up, and then Jane?
Yeah.
Carol Levin, and then Jane.
I'm wondering if you anticipate, and it's hard to anticipate this, but any major court cases coming out of these immigration forays that we're going through right now?
Well, some of them have already been filed. The state of Illinois, our AG, who's been great, Kwame Raoul, joined with other attorneys general in a case in Seattle, again, to set aside the birthright citizenship executive order. There was a case filed in Chicago that is still pending in court. They did not get an injunction. Some of the immigrants' rights groups wanted to file the case led by Sheila Betty of the Northwestern Civil Rights Clinic to say that the raids here should be halted because they were brought in as a punitive measure because of the first exercise of First Amendment rights by these various immigrants' rights groups in Chicago. I think there's a standing problem there for those of you who know what standing is, but it's an important effort to just get the word out. I have a friend who wrote a whole book about losing cases where you bring a case because you want to expose some injustice, you may not be able to get the remedy in court. Our problem is the Supreme Court. We have a Supreme Court that has already granted unprecedented presidential immunity to the president. And what they are prepared to do with birthright citizenship there's already a 6-judge conservative majority. I'm not sure. And I don't know. I mean, we've had long established cases since 1940. The Supreme Court decided that immigrants have due process in deportation hearings. That was the case of Harry Bridges, the old trade unionist. There are cases involving motions to suppress. If you're abused during an arrest, can you file a Fourth Amendment motion to suppress the evidence? I don't know how long that stuff is going to last. I keep writing recommendation letters for law school for my college students at U of C, and I'm sort of thinking, okay, good. I'm glad you want to do that.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, as we see this administration also begin to try and stack the courts, if this should be something we should be pushing in terms of the qualifications. Dale Ho is a fabulous example of
James Ho,
someone.
He was a Solicitor General of Texas. He's the Fifth Circuit Court judge of the Court of Appeals. His politics I hate, but it's not about qualifications.
Jane Ramsey.
Yeah, Susan, thank you so much for really a thoughtful sort of laying out the history so that we understand, because there's so much misinformation and it helps us
Thank you. I'm glad
to
I'm
educate
glad
folks. Yeah, well, cool. Yeah. So the other thing is that CWTA is now a member of ICER. So we'll be having opportunities to connect our members. But I know that too, that there are, and I guess this goes back both, Susan and Emma, there are organizations all over the city. In my own neighborhood, it's called Protect RP, Protect Rogers Park, where residents are organizing to have watches. And so it would be, I think it would be very helpful for us to just hear, as folks hear about even these new kind of organizations in communities forming, so that our members and family and friends, we can let people know other places where they can connect. And so Susan and Emma, any other ones that we're in touch, and that would be useful for us to just help get the word out.
Sure. Carolina Sanchez had a question in the chat about, what about undocumented folks who have a temporary visitor driver's license? Well, the good news is in Illinois, the undocumented can now get regular driver's licenses. So if you have friends or colleagues who are undocumented, I think they should still be safe going into state of Illinois offices to get the new form of the driver's license, which will look like everyone else's driver's license.
That is incredible. I didn't know about that. So thank you so much for sharing. I'll definitely look
We
into
can
it.
thank ICER and all their fellow organizations for doing that.
Love it. Thank you.
Is that why we have so many foreign Uber drivers now?
Well, at least they're
able to get
licensed,
Yeah.
Before we allowed the
Yeah.
undocumented to get driver's licenses, it just seemed like a
Yeah.
public safety question. Would you want to be in an accident with somebody who didn't have a license, who didn't know what their address was? Maybe. They sent me a lot of Uber drivers from Kyrgyzstan, a place I have not seen immigrants in Chicago from before.
Yeah, they give the directions in whatever language they speak. And they're telling them where to go to take you to your designated spot.
Yeah. It adapts. The system adapts.
Okay, any other questions? For Emma or for Susan? Well, if not, I don't want to keep you, but I just want to say how informative both of you have been in terms of letting us know, particularly what the status is, both historically and currently, what's going on with immigrants in various communities. But more than that is what we can do. And I think if we care about immigrants, if we believe that we are a welcoming city, then whatever we can do to support and protect immigrants, is that what we should be doing? And Betty, I loved your idea of going to dine in Pilsen or in Little Village, where people are not coming out to eat because of fear. Because, the one thing that we learned in COVID is that when people don't participate and go to restaurants and small businesses, they can't survive. So, not just restaurants, but if you have to buy something, look and see whether or not you can buy it, whatever you need in Pilsen or Little Village. So all of those things help because we want to keep our small businesses in place because this too will pass. And as I say that, I've been keeping myself hopeful by saying we have to endure this for 2 years until we can have the midterm elections. But, Trump did us a favor by taking people out of the Congress. So we have a number of congressional seats that are open right now. Lisa the Stefanik in New York, who's going to the United Nations, her seat is open. And there's a wonderful candidate there. Duffy, who is a transportation secretary, another wonderful candidate. So if you can help with those candidates, with giving them a dollar or two, if I don't know if they're up on phone banking yet, but I'm sure my indivisible friends on this call will let us know about being able to do postcards or phone calls or anything in those districts. That if we could flip this Congress even earlier, we need to do it. All right. So it's on all of us to do what we can to try and bring Hakeem Jeffries to the speakership and get rid of that crazy Johnson guy.
Right.
So
Pam
that's my.
McAfee with the Progressive got tongue twisted. Progressive Mobilization Coalition is doing phone banking, and because they're also working on the what's his name? This guy in North Carolina that won't step down, the judge.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
And we all need to know there are 40 U.S. Senate seats open up for election in 26.
Right.
So we got a
Right.
chance to change
Including
that.
our own Dick Durbin.
Right.
So yeah. So Betty, if you can put that organization in the chat so people know. One more a source of doing something, and not just sitting back and lamenting and woe is me, because I'm never a believer of woe is me. That we have to do something. So anything we can do right now with helping the immigrants, anything we can do with flipping this Congress, if you care about this, if you're serious about it, let's do it.
So
For sure.
Jackie, I just put in the chat the info for the rally on Wednesday at noon at Federal Plaza. So the link to the Mobilize event is in the chat. And that's
Okay.
national. So in Chicago, we're going to the federal building, but it's all over the place to talk to our senators and, get them to do more, as I said, than just voting right. But the situation we're in calls for a lot more than that. We need to get them really, shutting down the Senate, doing whatever procedural things that they can do to stop this onslaught that we've been experiencing.
Yeah,
Somebody
for
put in,
sure.
it's chaired by Bob Creamer and Heather Booth. Let's hear it for Chicago.
How's that? Yeah, I just wanted to let everyone know, this is Emma, Pastor Emma, that today was called, it was short notice, but it was a day without an immigrant. I don't know how effective this was, but it was to prove our economic worth. But I know, like in Pilsen and Little Village, most of the businesses shut down. And just to be in solidarity with their workers. So I just wanted people to know, I'll let you know what the effectiveness was. But on a short term, I don't know. But I know if this was something that was done and was with time, it would have been very effective.
Well, there's no reason, Emma, if you're in touch with the organizers, that we can't do it with more lead time. This is not going to stop tomorrow. We're going to be fighting Trump and his ICERs for a while. So if you can be in touch and say, let's do this so that we have time to organize and be effective, I think, we can demonstrate that, we don't have any food if we don't have, a lot of the immigrants, that, we don't have services in terms of cleaning buildings and things of that sort without immigrants. I mean, there is an impact of immigrants in every area of our lives. So, I think it can be effective, but you do need organizing time, to make something like that happen. So anything else? I haven't been monitoring the chat. So if there's anything in the chat I've overlooked, Emma or Susan, that you want to respond to, please go ahead and do that.
Somebody asks, it'd be really helpful for you to write a Q&A. There are some very good materials out there. Emma and I aren't going to have to recreate the wheel, because people from OCAD to ICER to national organizations are putting out good stuff. So we can find a few. Somebody asked for something for her relatives who think that the undocumented didn't get in the line. We'll find some general good information material for you.
And Emma, let us
Great.
know when Congressman Gutierrez selects the restaurant or whatever for next week and the date.
Will do. Thank you.
Okay. Man, I don't know about the rest of you, but I feel like my head is exploding with information. And Sherry, you'll make sure that we've captured all of the links so we can make sure to get those out on our website and our social media. even before we get the recording out, so that people can definitely follow up in case they haven't captured all of the links. And anything else from anybody for the good of the order? Well, once again, Emma, Pastor Emma Lozano, Professor Susan Gzesh, thank you so very much. I think you've enlightened us, and don't be surprised if we come back at you with some more questions or assistance
Fine.
in the future. Okay, everyone have a wonderful night. And Jackie LG is going to stop us from saying good night. Go ahead, Jackie.
Buenas noches.
Just, can I make a real quick announcement, please? So I'm on the Reparations Commission for Illinois. I'm sorry. Okay. It's okay. And we're having our first hearing for 2025 at Northwestern campus in Evanston on this Saturday. I'll send the flyer to you, Jackie, or whomever can get it out to all of CWTA. Love to have you come if you can.
Okay, that's reparations, Northwestern, this coming Saturday at what time, Jackie?
10 to 1.
10 to 1. Okay, all right, so get it to us and Sherry will
I will.
post it for us. All right, thank you
Thank
all
you.
again, very
Night.
much, and look forward to seeing you next month. And if with some of these rallies and events that are coming up with either Federal Plaza with Indivisible or Congressman Gutierrez or whatever, hope to see you there. So thank you all very much and have a wonderful evening.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Buenas
Bye.
noches.